I asked AI to plan out a brand new season of The Sopranos, set in 2025. I know what you're thinking, AI is awful and will make a real mess of this, but I was actually pretty impressed. The results weren't perfect, but at the same time, it did come up with a pretty decent story for a new season, which struck a nice balance between respecting the first 6 seasons while still exploring new characters and storylines. There were some interesting ideas in there too, which I'll come to later, like who takes over the Sopranos crew, what happened to Carmela, AJ and Meadow if Tony really was assassinated at Holston's in that famous final scene, and how would an organised crime family function in the modern world. If you're curious about what would happen in a new season of The Sopranos set in 2025, then keep watching. I'll talk you through all the characters that would be included and how their stories would play out over a brand new season of The Sopranos. Before we get into the detail, I'll talk you through the process I used to generate all this stuff. It was pretty simple. I used an AI tool called Claude, gave it a simple prompt to create a new season of Sopranos set in 2025. The only additional guidance I gave it was to assume that Tony was killed at Holston's due to James Gandolfini's sad death. I forgot to tell the AI that Tony Sirico's Paulie should also be written out because the actor died a few years ago, but Claude knew that anyway and wrote him out. The first series outline it created included Silvio coming out of a 20-year-long coma at the end of the first episode, which I thought was a bit too unbelievable that he'd be kept in a coma all that time to pop up with key plot information just as we rejoin the series. Instead, he's a character in this new season and woke from his Season 6 coma shortly after the end of Season 6, but has been severely impaired from his experience and lives in a home. I also had to remind Claude about the New York families and to include them in this new season to create more dramatic tension. Otherwise, this is all the AI's work that you're about to see. So let's start off by looking at which characters would be involved in this theoretical Season 7 of Sopranos. With Tony gone, this season doesn't seem to have a single perspective character and instead takes more of an ensemble approach. This would mean the season isn't so reliant on one single character, and nobody is the same dominant presence that Tony was in the first 6 seasons. With Gandolfini's performance in Sopranos being so incredible, it seems sensible to spread around the screen time rather than trying to make any single person replace a character that's simply irreplaceable. The first character on our list is Carmela Soprano. She's now 62 and has reinvented herself as a respected real estate developer in New Jersey. This career does make sense as she studied for her realtor's license back in Season 4. She lives in a modest but elegant home after moving out of the Soprano house. I suppose somewhere smaller makes sense now the kids have grown up. With fewer memories of her past might be appealing, but I'd feel like it would be a shame not to see the old Soprano house. With so many characters not able to come back for this season either because they died in the show or in real life, keeping continuity with the locations would make sense to me, but this is what the AI came up with. As her new career suggests, Carmela has moved away from the criminal lifestyle and is a law-abiding citizen, though still struggles with her complicity in Tony's criminal life. Her relationship with AJ and Meadow continues to be strained. Most likely there's a mixture of being resentful and proud of Meadow's success and frustrated by AJ still struggling to get his act together as he approaches middle age. And I think both kids are likely to see the hypocrisy of her bragging about leaving the criminal lifestyle when she only managed to do that because of the advantages being Mrs. Tony Soprano afforded her. This holier-than-thou attitude will be tough for AJ and Meadow to swallow because they both are somewhat mob-connected all these years after Tony's death. Carmela's main story in Season 7 would revolve around her hunting down Tony's hidden assets, and the journey she goes on to find them will reveal some dark secrets from her dead husband's shady past. Meadow would be a very interesting character in Season 7 as she's now 45 and a successful defense attorney defending white-collar criminals. While she's done well enough to break free from her father's criminal world, her marriage to Patsy Parisi means she's replaced her father with her husband and faces the same issues of having one foot in the legitimate world and another in the criminal underbelly. Her story in Season 7 would involve her taking on cases for mobsters, including some that are rumoured to have had a hand in her father's assassination. This creates a nice conflict of interest, particularly given her husband is heavily involved in this life too. She's likely at some point to have to choose between her career aspirations and her loyalty to her family. The AI also suggests that she's got to deal with unwittingly becoming the family's new consigliere, which I find a bit of a stretch, but I suppose it's possible. If she's made a name for herself as a top criminal defense attorney, I suppose she'd be very useful to people in the mob, and her maiden name would carry respect too. AJ, unsurprisingly, remains a bit of a bum. He's drifted through life, bouncing between legitimate business and the fringes of organised crime. At this point, he's struggling to run a New Jersey sports bar in the building that used to be the Bada Bing. Showing the originality and intelligence he was famous for in the earlier seasons, this venture of his is called the Bada Bing II. To keep his head above water, he's forced to allow the business to be used as a front for money laundering, and it's a hangout for various criminals. Like his father, AJ has lifelong struggles with mental health that continue to impact his quality of life.
He has a teenage son that is like Tony, which I presume means being the hard-nosed criminal in waiting that AJ never was. The central dilemma for AJ over this season is whether he commits to the criminal world or pulls away. His son is called Anthony Soprano III. Maybe his son's shenanigans makes that choice for him, as even while technically still a child, he's showing signs of being the next Tony Soprano. AJ may even choose to ride his son's coattails.
Silvio is another character that brings a familiar face to the story and also ties the present timeline in with the original series. In Season 6, we left him in a coma after a failed assassination attempt. In Season 7, he's 74 years old, permanently disabled from the shooting, and has brain damage after spending a long time in a coma. This brain damage means that on some days he can barely talk, but there are moments of lucidity on other days where he can remember his past and help progress the plot by dropping little story nuggets. The remaining members of the DeMeo crime gang regularly visit Sil for guidance and insight despite his reduced capacity. They also have arranged for him to be well taken care of through the construction unions, paying for an expensive care home and taking care of his wife, Gabriella. As Tony's former consigliere, he knows details about Tony's final days, which could be damaging for the remaining Sopranos. Maybe he also knows a little about the hidden assets that Carmela's hunting for. Patsy Parisi was nearly whacked when he couldn't get over his twin brother being murdered, way back in Season 2. However, he was the highest-ranking member of the DeMeo family left standing after Tony's assassination, and stepped into the power vacuum. He's remained at the top of the family for 20 years by taking a more modest and low-profile role. This has meant having to accept more interference with New York, but it's better to accept a smaller piece of the pie than be stabbed by the person slicing up the pie. Patsy's overly cautious approach is questioned by more ambitious, younger members of the gang, maybe including his own son, who resents the fall from grace the family have had since Tony's death. This could be another one of the secrets that Silvio could let slip. Patsy will spend Season 7 trying to keep everything ticking along and maintaining calm while things increasingly start to spiral out of control. He isn't the force of nature that Tony was as boss, but over 20 years of relative peace, he will have developed strategies to maintain his position and shouldn't be underestimated. With Paulie dead or in the can, little Paulie is now the capo of his old crew. Paulie Walnut's nephew isn't the man his uncle was though, and struggles to command respect among the members of his crew. He makes risky and ill-advised moves to try and stay on top of things which often backfire on him and the family. While he seems like he's mostly in the story for comic relief, he also forms an unlikely alliance over the season with AJ, which makes sense as each is struggling to come out of the shadow of a more successful father figure. Janice has stayed in the area and raised her daughter Domenica, and has been a stepmother to Bobby's 2 children after he was shot and killed towards the end of Season 6. Apparently she's mellowed with age, but is still a schemer and manipulator. She's covered financially thanks to Bobby's pensions and insurance, which will most likely come from the union work he did. Because she's Janice though, she wants more. Maybe this is partly her motivation when she starts to drag up the past and talking about historic crimes by members of the Soprano crew. I feel like there's more that could be done with Janice's character than is listed here. I think that she'd be more likely to become more erratic and angry as she enters her 60s, and without Tony to moderate her, she'd be likely to be a loose cannon. Also, there's no mention of her being in a relationship, whereas in the first 6 seasons she bounced from one relationship to the next, often with made men, most likely looking for someone to replace her father, and also to help get her closer to the action. I'd expect her to be in some sort of relationship with a mobster, maybe even Patsy, the boss. She would definitely not approve of his safety-first approach, and that could be another bit of conflict to throw into the mix. Little Bobby and Sophia would now be in their 30s and could potentially be characters in this new season. The AI suggests that Bobby III would follow in his father and grandfather's footsteps by becoming a mobster, whereas Sophia would break free from the criminal world. This repeats the theme that's common in The Sopranos of either breaking free from your upbringing or embracing it. Though if I'm honest, I think this is already well covered by other characters, and giving these two a lot of screen time wouldn't bring anything much new to the table. Though after AJ bullied little Bobby when they were both children, it might be interesting to have Bobby working at AJ's sports bar now. It was surprising to hear that in 2025, Vesuvio is not just still surviving, but it's actually thriving. Artie and Charmaine Bucco, now happily married and prosperous, have a chain of restaurants and are enjoying a great deal of success. Given their relationship and business seems to be on the rocks so much in the first 6 seasons, it would be good to see them thriving. Artie's relative success would also mean that he's not dependent on the mobsters that he'd previously needed to keep himself afloat, but much to Charmaine's annoyance, he would still maintain his friendships towards the DeMeo family crew. It's not mentioned in the AI's story, but it would be a lot of fun to have the roles reversed between Charmaine and Carmela. After Carmela bossed Charmaine around when she catered a party at the Soprano household, Charmaine could utilise Carmela's new career as a real estate agent as an excuse to rub her nose in their success and wealth compared to Carmela's more modest living situation since Tony's death. On the New York side of things, Butch would be the boss of their crew despite being in his 70s and not being so hands-on anymore. He was instrumental in establishing peace between New York and New Jersey after the killings that occurred towards the end of season 6. He's likely to have a relationship with Patsy Parisi that echoes Tony and Johnny Sack, friendly on the surface but with little trust between the two. However, they've settled into a relatively harmonious relationship. Just as Patsy has younger and more ambitious gangsters under him that want them to have a bigger piece of the pie, Butch will have members of his crew that are pushing for the New Jersey crew to come fully under their control. Butch's age and declining health will make it increasingly hard to establish control, and there's already a tussle between his captains for who will be his successor. After his failed attempt to take control of his father's crime family, Carmine Luperetti has continued to advance his film production career, which makes him legitimately successful. He's still involved in the family business, but more as an outsider. His son has chosen a life of crime and is fully committed, which will have caused friction in the family. Children following or not following in their father's footsteps is a recurring theme, but I think this one is more interesting due to Carmine never realising his ambition to be a proper gangster, whereas his son perhaps does a better job of it. Though I suppose AJ has the same thing going on here, so I'd probably pick the most interesting of these two story threads and ditch the other. Walden Belfiore didn't get a lot of screen time, but he's been brought back for this season, mostly because of what he knows. He was the one that killed Phil Leotardo, and this secret, among other things he's been involved in, haunt him. An interest in spirituality and mysticism led him to wanting to come clean and get these things off his chest, which won't end well for anyone. Maria Moltisanti was tiny at the end of season 6, but would be in her early 20s now, and would have spent most of that time without her dad after Tony murdered him. She's a talented filmmaker, and over the course of season 7, she'll be making a documentary about organised crime in New Jersey, which gives her the perfect opportunity to dig her nose in where it doesn't belong and to dredge up the past, including details surrounding her father's death. Despite the AI no mentioning Benny Fazio at all, it has created a new character, his son, Dante. He's there to represent the modern face of the organised criminal. He sneers at the old ways of doing things, but relies on the criminal network his father was a part of to support his online crime. He's romantically entangled with Maria Moltisanti, which helps her get access to criminals initially, but eventually complicates her documentary. I'd probably merge this character with Anthony Soprano III to cut down the slightly too big cast list. The final cast member of Soprano Season 7 is Victor Luperetti, Carmine Jr.'s son, and he's desperate to expand the scope of the crime family and to take over the mantle from Butch. He's highly educated, but has a ruthless streak that makes his ambition not seem completely deluded. He could have worked in his father's production company, but chose to do things his own way instead. Who is missing? I've mentioned that Benny didn't make the cut on this cast list, despite his son being a fairly central character. There were some other major omissions from The Sopranos, where the character and actor are both still alive. Dr. Melfi is the most glaring omission. I suppose with her ditching Tony as a client at the end of season 6, she took herself out of the story, but it wouldn't be hard to bring her back in. One of the adult children that are introduced could be a therapist, and she could be providing them with supervision like Elliot did for her. Her treatment of Tony was confidential, so it would be easy for her to be supporting someone like Sofia Baccagliari without disclosing this connection. Another way for Melfi to become involved would be for her writing a book about her treatment of Tony. With the time passed since his death, she may think it's safe to disclose the details of their therapy and her eventual conclusion that therapy doesn't work on criminal psychopaths. This sort of book would put her in the sights of the surviving members of the Soprano crew, who aren't the type to like books being written about them and rarely let things slide. Another glaring omission is Junior Soprano. He had dementia 20 years ago though, so it would take some wrangling to give him a storyline beyond him being cared for in a long-term health facility, though at least if nothing else he could be in the same facility as Silvio, even if he's mostly there for old time's sake. All in all, I think there's a lot of potential with this outline and cast list. The story would involve delving into the past because of the legacy of the events in Season 6, but there are also new power struggles and interesting developments in the undercriminal world. Obviously, it's not going to be the same without James Gandolfini's mesmerising central performance, but with an ensemble cast, there doesn't need to be a single star, and there will be more space to explore the story from different viewpoints, rather than being stuck with one character. With a huge budget and the right people involved, I think returning to The Sopranos in 2025 has the potential to be very interesting. I can understand the arguments that the original series was perfect and we shouldn't go back and mess with it, but on the other hand, as a fan of the series, it would be almost impossible not to want to go back and see what's going on with the surviving members of the Soprano crew and Tony's family. I've mentioned as I've gone along that the AI wasn't always perfect with the way they've envisioned the cast for a 7th season, but on the whole I think it's pretty good. I'd forgotten how many children there were in the original seasons that would have reached adulthood now to backfill all the characters that have been killed off.
I think it's also interesting to think about how organised crime has changed in the modern world. Not that it's gone away, but it's become more online and technical. Something organisations like the Mafia will have to wrestle with, just like legitimate business has done over the years. I have also created a detailed breakdown of each of the 13 episodes that would make up a 7th season of Sopranos. If you would like to see a video where I go through this plan episode by episode, then please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let me know. If there's enough interest, I'll make that video in the next few weeks. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Goodbye.